Welcome, everybody. This is the end of year podcast for Tech.eu. It's been a big year in tech, so we've decided to do something a little bit different. Rather than just have myself and John talking about the year and the latest trends and deals and funding and all that kind of stuff, we decided we're going to ask some of our guests who were some of them participants or in companies that were some of the most read articles this year. So, hi, John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks for the invite, Kate.
Fantastic. And Ricardo, welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Maybe you could just start and give us a little elevator pitch for TEKEVER.
Of course. So, my name is Ricardo. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of TEKEVER. We are an autonomy company. So we build AI-enabled autonomous systems. We specialize in aerial systems for security and defense. So we do everything from, war survey and do surveillance, maritime surveillance over the largest bodies of water in Europe, for example, over the British Channel, over the Mediterranean. And we're very active in the defense world, working with countries throughout the world to do force protection, ISR missions, etc. So we're very involved in Ukraine as well. We are about 1,200 people today. A very fast-growing company.
Amazing. And so it feels like 2025 has really been a watershed for particularly defense tech. Why is that, and what have you been seeing? That you've been around a long time, obviously, as a company.
Sure.
Why have we seen this speed up, particularly this year?
Well, I think it's a number of factors. There's a more generic one from a technology point of view. I think we've hit a few tipping points in terms of technology that allow us to have a lot more compute on a lot more restricted spaces. We and this area in general, weight, power is a very big thing because you're doing things with very small envelopes, and so the ability to deal with a lot of data and to run very efficient algorithms completely disconnected from the network is really important, and I think that achieved a certain level. Having said this, the geopolitical environment that we're living in today is really changing, right? And so, the war in Ukraine, which broke out in 22, the change in how the different geopolitical blocks relate to each other triggered, for example, a huge defense investment in Europe. With countries bringing defense investment to 5% over the next few years, and obviously this changes things. Also, and related to the first point, you're seeing a lot of advances in AI, which obviously then revert to robotics, which is basically embodied AI, right? So it's been a turmoil in this industry. From a technical point of view and from a geopolitical point of view.
And in terms of operations, what does automation mean for you as a company in this space? Because it is such an emotive topic for a lot of people that don't really understand defense tech.
No, of course. So what TEKEVER does is we build. So we are a very, very vertically integrated company. So we build everything inside the system. But we do two different types of things. For some customers, more on the civilian side, we do almost like full outsourcing of surveillance. So we build the systems, we operate them, we process the data, we give the customers insights. So for example, when we're surveying the channel or when we're doing operations to do nature protection over the coast of Italy or in Iceland, or it's really about surveying, protecting large areas, right? And when you do this, some of these missions, because they're very long, they're very far away. Sometimes we're like 400, 500 kilometers away inside the ocean, and so if you do this by removing the pilot, the people, the crew from risk, and you do it with a robot, which is essentially what we build, you can do it more efficiently from a cost point of view, but also from an operational point of view, and putting less people at risk. And so to do these types of missions, you need a lot of intelligence. So it's not really automation, it's what we call autonomy, which is different. You basically, you don't know what you're going to do. You take a lot of decisions. So this is one case. The other case is more in defense, where we're sometimes our systems are operating in areas where we can't be operating it ourselves, like in the front line in Ukraine. We have lots of systems there doing long-range surveillance, target acquisition, those types of missions. It's the same type of technology, but a completely different use, and it's used and operated by our customers, not by ourselves. So it's essentially about removing the human element from risk. Humans are obviously involved in the most critical decisions, but remove them from the risk of being in the air, very, very far away.
Yeah.
You don't. Oh, sorry. Can I? You don't do strike. You don't do strike drones, then, do you? Is that something you would look to do?
No, we do surveillance. We retrieve data. Sometimes you're doing missions that are in real time and you're integrated in a kill chain, of course. Sometimes you're doing missions where you're just doing reconnaissance over 15, 16, 20 hours, retrieving data totally silent, and that creates an image of what's going on in the battlefield.
Yeah, which is critical because, as you say, you have a lot of those sort of black box environments where otherwise you don't know what's going on, but people are at risk. So it's integral, and it's funny. Last time I was in Ukraine, I was in Ukraine a couple of times this year, talking to a lot of defense tech companies. How little connectivity there is for a lot of the frontline soldiers. That really surprised me, I've got to say. You would expect them to be, getting all this kind of, IoT connected devices and Bluetooth and stuff, and a lot of it just wasn't there.
It's a very to give some context. It's a very, very, very demanding environment because of
very rugged.
warfare. If you are transmitting, you're basically showing where you are. So a lot of these missions require full autonomy. You need to be completely autonomous, and you need to rely on AI to understand where you're going, what you're seeing, and then only when needed transmit that information back.
Yeah, absolutely.
In some cases.
Yeah, exactly. But what's it been? Tell me a little bit about what the experience has been working there. And I guess I was also thinking about it in terms of what does it mean to build and deploy defense tech alongside an active conflict?
Well, it's extremely demanding. TEKEVER is a dual-use company. We came from the civilian world, and the fact that we operated our systems ourselves for customers like Home Office or EMSA allowed us, because we're a manufacturer in a technology company, but also an operator, allowed us to create a continuous cycle of feedback between the operators, which are our own teams, and engineers, right? And this feedback loop that we've always had is something that we didn't really think or imagine could be applied in defense. We wished it would be, but it wasn't really until a few years back, because it's everything took a long time. Now, what happened when we started in Ukraine is and we were involved pretty much since the beginning, was we were able to implement this very close relation with the operators, where it basically put the same processes working with the Ukrainian operators than we had with our own operators in completely different civilian missions to work.
Amazing.
Which means that the Ukrainian operators are literally in constant connection with the product development teams, the production teams, and so forward, which allows us to iterate really, really fast. Now, we thought we were really fast iterating. We typically had like 3-4 week development cycles outside of Ukraine, way before the Ukraine this at least this phase of the conflict began in 22. But the level of evolution in Ukraine is just insane. It's a cat and mouse game where you need to evolve literally on a weekly basis. and that demands a lot from companies, especially if you're working, at scale. What we do is at scale, and so you need to be evolving constantly, but be evolving at scale. And so being active being involved in an active conflict is extremely demanding. If there is any positive aspect to all of this negative thing, and people killed, etc., constantly,
100%.
daily, and this aggression is that the fact that because you need it so much on the field, you're able to deploy, to test, very quickly advances in technology that otherwise take sometimes months or years, right? Obviously, this is the very positive in me trying to look for a silver lining in a war where people are dying, right? But it's if there is some positive about it, is the speed at which it allows technology to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been absolutely something that stood out for me talking to companies. The fact that people are able to test, to pilot their technology fast, particularly in sandboxes set up by various governments and their military. They're able to get them in the hands of the users, which is not always the case in a lot of the tech we work with. So it's amazing. And so you're a unicorn. Congratulations. What does that mean in practice for a company like you?
Well, it's not a metric we really care much about, to be honest.
I know. I think it's more a journalist thing, right?
TEKEVER has been around for a long time. We've been profitable for a number of years.
Yeah.
We decided to raise this round this year because we saw that we were going to have to go faster from an expansion point of view. With everything happening in Europe and the geopolitical shifts between Europe and the US and forward.
100%.
And so we decided to raise a round, and it took us a couple of days basically. We are not optimized for for short-term stuff. We're a very long thinking company, very deep technology stack. We think in many years.
Decades.
So for this for us was obviously interesting. I think it was very rewarding for everyone that works here. I think it was very good from a market perspective. It's the first time we said, look, actually we're worth more than $1 billion. We hadn't said anything before that. I think it was useful to position us from a market perspective, but most importantly, I think to reward the team. This is what we've been working on for a long time. We haven't been working to become a unicorn or anything like that, but it's a nice consequence.
John, is there anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, just quickly, it'd be good because I'm in the UK, so it'd be good to get. I think you've pledged to create 1,000 jobs in the UK.
Yeah.
And secondly, this isn't a related question, but obviously when I think about you, I think about your competitors in Europe, like I guess Helsing and Anduril coming over. Are there any areas where you kind of work together with those companies too? Or are they out and out competitors, or is there any areas where you kind of team up and collaborate?
I think
so. The UK go on.
No, go ahead.
So the UK question and that question, great.
Yes. So first of all, we've been in the UK since 2013. First office we opened was in Southampton. We have more than 200 people in the UK, growing really fast. We now have multiple offices. The program we are setting up in the UK, we call it Overmatch. It's we're investing over £400 million over the next few years.
Fantastic.
We already bought an airport, announced a big factory in Swindon. We'll have a few other announcements in the coming weeks, January and February. But the whole point is it's to develop a defense tech ecosystem and help bring this experience that we've had and we haven't currently are as well, exposed tremendously in Ukraine, and bring these learnings into the UK, which is obviously a completely different environment. You have to deal with a regulatory environment, compliance to norms, etc., etc. So us and everyone else. Now, what we know clearly about defense is that you have multiple companies, you have maybe competition in some programs and in some areas, but with companies like Anduril and Helsing, we have an excellent relationship, and we actually do missions together, do joint exercises. We are currently doing these types of things, and there's a lot of complementarity in the technology. And so I think what we are very specialized on, it's very different from what they are very specialized on. Obviously, there's touch points, but we are, there's a great ground for partnerships in this area.
Amazing.
And I think that is how we need to think in Europe.
I think
if
so
we
too.
are able to do something meaningful from a defense tech environment as a whole in Europe, is we need to cooperate and to do stuff together to gain scale.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will let you go because I know you've got a very important meeting, but the best from all of us at Tech.eu for the festive season and the holidays.
Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks so much. Merry Christmas. Well, what we did was we looked at the top read articles of the year, and we invited some of those people over and said, can you come and join us on our end of year podcast? It's much more interesting than us just talking about you, because you can talk about yourselves. You can give us the insider, because you are the ones in the companies. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of go around, ask people some questions, join in, participate however you like. That would be wonderful. All right, let's start with EU Inc. Andreas, Simon, welcome. Wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolute pleasure. In case anyone's been living under a rock for the last year, just in case, could you give us a little elevator pitch on what EU Inc. is, and then we'll dig into some questions.
Yeah, the core idea behind EU Inc. is that in Europe, we are not fighting or competing globally on European scale. We are competing on national silos, where pretty much any country, any ecosystem competes on their own against massive blocks like the US or China. So the goal of EU Inc. is to create a pan-European standard for incorporation, like legal entities, incorporation and investments and stock options. So to pretty much like make it possible in Europe to, as a founder, to officially start a company, raise money, get your first people and all this kind of stuff. The main idea behind it, though, is just to unify the European startup ecosystem and make it possible for Europe to act as like one block.
Amazing. And so can you maybe give us an idea about what's happened this year and where are you at now? Where do things sit? Because I know there's been some progress over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, sure. Simon, do you want to give the update on the year? Because we had like an amazing year, actually.
You've had a huge year.
Wait, Simon, your mic is off.
Let me go get the cap, actually, Andreas. 1 second.
Yeah, get the cap. Should I get mine? Then I have to take my earbuds out.
I will quickly jump in until Simon has his mic.
No, that's okay. Go the cap.
So for quick context, it's actually technically almost like our first year as well. Like we started last year, October. And we are now, in this year, 28th regime, which is the legal framework behind all of that, moved from a fringe idea in Brussels, like a meme almost, like the thing that should be done but will never happen, moved from that to essentially the number one thing that everybody talks about. Yes. Now I'm like feeling really embarrassed because I don't have my cap with me. Anyway, so like 28th regime moved from like a fringe meme to actually the core request and the core thing that people speak about when it comes to competition, innovation, and this kind of stuff. And that's number one. Number two, it became the number one item in the startup strategy for Brussels, the official one. We also, it became, there was like a whole consultation around it, which became the number one consultation in that specific field. And a bunch of other stuff. And by now, pretty much everybody in Brussels agrees with us on this whole topic and like how it should be structured. There's obviously always people who don't agree. That's like just the nature of democracy, I guess. And by now, the president confirmed that by Q1 next year, she wants to propose a law in this direction. Which means like in March, Brussels will say how they think this whole thing can be implemented and like how it will be hopefully aligned with what we have. And all of that is possible because we had 21,000 plus founders and investors supporting this, including people like you, obviously, Cate and Filip and multiple others. And pretty much every unicorn founder, every VC that's anybody, like supports this. So it was like, quite frankly, for a thing that's like boring, like policy, I think it was the most successful thing I've ever seen, at least in my career.
Me too. I mean, the fact this was a grassroots campaign started by founders, for founders and VCs and ecosystem builders, and everyone just went, yeah, why don't we have this? Let's do it. And just got on with it, which I love. I think it just shows the momentum that we have in Europe. It's so much energy put into Europe bashing. And I see things like this and I say, well, no, we can actually work collectively for the greater good and get like these real systemic changes. And I think that's amazing.
I strongly believe that the main difference between, for example, America and Europe is the system we operate in. Like people frequently talk about mindset and this kind of stuff. I think mindset is an outcome of a system. If stuff is more likely to succeed, you're more likely to do stuff. If that stuff is more likely to have really high upside, you're more likely to risk more stuff. And the reason why I strongly believe that we have all the mindset needed and like all the ability is because we export it right now to the US. So we just need to fix our system and like we will have easily as efficient ecosystem here. And like for me, this is like mainly unifying and fixing the market. Hey, Simon is back.
Welcome back, Simon. And hey, Jed, good to have you here.
Hey, likewise. Good to see you all.
And so, I mean, one thing I always wonder about Brussels, and some of this might be my Australian ignorance, because Australian Parliament is a little bit different, a little bit more different composition. Let's just say it's a very varied number of backgrounds for politicians. So when you're talking to politicians, do they have a integral understanding of the challenges of startups and small businesses? Like, do they come from these spaces, or are they coming in kind of like, and you have to teach them?
It's a mixed bag, I would say. Some come, like there's people who come from like actual tech background, but by default, obviously people who go into policy aren't the same people that will start unicorn companies. Like it's a different kind of people usually, it's a different industry. The main issue you have in Brussels especially, but I think in politics in general, is not so much that they haven't heard the right ideas, is that they have heard like 50 billion ideas around the same problem. It's more like signal versus noise,
Yeah, right.
And even startups cannot agree what the right solutions for startups are. You know what I mean? So from my experience, that's the biggest issue. Simon, what's your POV? Like you have like way more policy experience than I do.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in there if I may. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And Cate, you've been such a strong supporter for EU Inc. Important to say. Thanks a bunch for that.
Oh, very welcome.
I think the biggest issue in Brussels is actually a knowledge gap. So we're very much in our own bubble. I remember recently we were at Web Summit, I think, at a side event, and asking the audience, I think it was 150 people in the audience, who knows EU Inc. And you would expect a lot of people would know it, but they don't. And I think this is very true for a lot of the startup bubble, but similarly to the policy bubble. These are inherently separate. And the challenge is to build the bridge and actually also on some level, shape or form, help educate what the terms are, what are the standard patterns you see in venture capital, et cetera, et cetera. How would you know that if you've grown up in, let's say, agricultural, I don't know, whatever background they might have, right? They're coming from all different kinds of backgrounds. And the commissioners especially, I think it's worth noting that the commissioners elected for 5 years, they have their own 4 years. They have their own sort of strategy on how to get there from their member states. And that is rarely directly connected to the actual DG, whatever, Directeur General they're dealing with. So they're work. In this case, first time in 10 years, we have a startup commissioner. In 10 years that I'm working there, ever in the commission. So Zarajeva actually has the label startups in her job description, which I think is a huge step forward. 10 years ago, when I started working in Brussels on policy, we needed to explain what a startup is. So slowly creeping there, it's getting there.
Yeah, amazing. And Filip and Jed, what's your experience as investors? Because obviously you're also supporters of this.
I mean, I can start, and good to get Jed's perspective as well. But I think it's
cool.
the way I see it is like we obviously love initiatives like EU Inc. because it's driving the ecosystem forward. And my feeling is anyone you speak to, they get it immediately why this needs to change. I mean, it's concerning, regulation, stock options, unified capital markets. There's so many topics that are, I think for us, they're quite obvious, but it sort of needs that bridge to politics to get these things across. And, I was thinking about this maybe differently a few years ago when I think I had more the perspective of we're VCs, our job is to invest, our job is to find the best founders, support them, and not really get involved in policy and politics. But that view has really changed for me because I think part of supporting founders is also try and make a difference with policies and trying to really also change the discussion on a political level. That's something that we've been trying very much. I mean, I'm based in Berlin mostly, so we've been very active here also with the German government that has just announced the Germany fund. It was actually yesterday. I'm on the board of the KfW Capital. That's also trying to push the ecosystem overall. So I think it needs to come from all sides. It needs to come from obviously, you guys at EU Inc. that are, fully focused on this, but then we all need to chime in. Founders need to chime in, investors need to chime in, and we need to push this together because it's not a small task. It needs to happen. And that's why we are also excited to get involved from the Cherry side.
Fantastic. What about you, Jed?
Yeah, from the UK side, I guess I kind of bring two perspectives to this. The first is Antler's a global VC. We're in 6 continents, 26 locations around the world. And so when we talk with our other partners, obviously you get a view of how do they view the local government support for the startups that they're working with. And I think the short answer is everyone's quite envious, for being frank, just in terms of EMI, EIS, and just kind of the incentives that are at play for investors and founders. I think, with the last policy update, there's some definitely steps in the right direction there on AMI. And as a former operator, I benefited from EMI as well. And it's a great message to founders, there's more talent and you can help out with hiring in the UK in order to make it more attractive. EIS similar. I think it's a great policy and I was happy to see it expanded.
Amazing. Cool. What about you, John? You got any questions?
Yeah, just for clarity, with the 28th regime, is it the case that the EU might come back with amended proposals, or how will it actually likely pan out? And is there, what are the most important parts of the proposal that you want accepting? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So number one is the EU Inc. is basically a community sourced proposal. So this is, think of us more like rain dancers than actual policymakers. We are trying to help them coming up with the right idea.
It's a great analogy.
It's genuinely that's how it feels. And so we can't really say what they will actually do in the end. We will see, and we're along the way, but how it is. They say one thing, they do another thing, they do another thing, say another thing. It really depends. So far, we're the only proposal that has any buy-in by the startup ecosystem. There was a proposal by the parliament which got so massive pushback that even the guy who wrote it tracked back a bit. The main cornerstones that we push for is that it's one actual standard for across Europe and not implemented differently in each country, for example, which seems obvious, but it's not apparently. Number two is that we don't want this to be niched to some small groups. So, for example, only companies in the first 3 years, only until you're 50 people, only until you have 1 million revenue, or only if you do fusion energy. But the goal of this is to, the goal of startups in general is to drive GDP. And the goal here is to build companies that drive GDP, period. And if you want to do a hot dog company, that hot dog company becomes a unicorn, great, And because of that, we don't want any limitation on it, which in practice means we don't, this should be for anybody, not only for innovative startups or something like that, And we also understand that if we do this, this means that these companies will become really big, will be big taxpayers, big employers, and it's unlikely that Germany or France wants to hand over, tax or employment rights to Brussels, for these companies. So what we advocate for is that by default, the legal entity only standardizes corporate law, but the other stuff stays local. Not because we think perfect, but we think that's a compromise that makes stuff possible. And additionally, ideally, also have a new registry so that you can actually properly digital leapfrog and all this kind of stuff, because I live in a country where fax is still a thing, you know. So
I know. We had to buy a new printer yesterday in 2025, right?
don't get me started about lottery. Simon, anything I forgot on this?
I think the most important part is that this is a product for the startup community. So people need to actually be able to use it. And I think Brussels has the fallacy to often think in concept studies, regulations, and whatnot. And I don't think that the startup community actually cares. As long as we're able to somewhat log into a website, found a company, and share our cap table and sell shares, we'll be all right. And I think that needs to be the ultimate goal. And that's the biggest challenge I still see, the translation effort from actually policy into a digital product that's usable.
Yeah, for me, I think it's so important to have. Oh, sorry, John. Did you have a question?
No, you go on. Go on, Karen.
Okay. No, just a quick one. I think for me, what's so important is to have that rollout across all the member states, because the fact that you can go to somewhere like Ukraine or Estonia and found a company in 5 minutes versus what happens here in Germany or in Spain or Italy, the disparity is profound, and we want everyone to be on this playing field where we can ultimately compete as a continent, if I can say that, against China and Asia and so forth. So
also like
it makes
to create liquidity between them, right? Like it should be normal that somebody from Germany invests in Poland, and it's not. And whereas if you if you're an MIT student, you will get an investment from Silicon Valley, from New York, from anywhere. You know what I mean? And we don't even have these distances, but it's unthinkable that you would invest in a different legal system in Europe. Like it's very uncommon in like the earliest stages. Like I'm really talking about like founder just started, first few 100,000. Like it's very uncommon. We looked at the numbers. It's like less than 18%.
And the solution to this, Andreas, right? I mean, people just form a Delaware corp, and then and obviously that cannot be the objective. And I mean, we need
Plus,
only the experienced ones to. Sorry, Simon.
That's outdated too. If you look at Delaware, as a system, it's not really working. So one of our taglines is always that corporate law has been designed before the internet. How is that supposed to properly regulate innovation? So this is an obvious thing to solve. If we did that in Europe in the way that we're suggesting, we believe it's leapfrogging. Like we're the first block in the world that has a system that was really tailored for startups, which would be a first timer, wouldn't it?
Also, one thing that we keep in mind that we come from the startup industry, so our job is to make very complex problem appear very simple, and then be very naive about what's possible and exploit, just get bigger and bigger. But one thing I strongly think is possible, to use something like EU-Inc. to also create a standard for that countries can join that are not part of the EU, so that the UK could theoretically join this, or other future members of the EU could join this. For example, if I invest in Brazil, this would be most likely a Delaware Inc. Why? Why shouldn't this be something that Europe provides a better solution for globally, or at least in our block? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if it's EU member state or not on the long run, hopefully.
Just quickly, just more broadly, just broaden it out. Do you think this kind of negative perception about Europe has got worse, particularly from the US? I was listening to a podcast earlier this week from Sequoia, and it was a great podcast. He was interviewing the chief execs of Lovable and 11 Labs, and it was really informative. But when he introed the podcast, he introed it as two founders from ye old Europe, which I think I found as quite kind of patronizing. I just wondered, do you think this kind of the negative sentiment from the US to Europe has got worse over time, or has it always been there?
I will say yes before everybody in the room screams yes. So 100%, it has been going on since the first phase of Trump, but it has been going on for quite some time. I used to work in San Francisco 5-6 years, so it has been a thing for quite some time. It was just not as explicit and as outgoing and loud. For me personally, I think that there's two main reasons behind it. One is the truth. So 50% of the arguments are basically, the high productivity jobs of the last 25 years, like in software, cloud, and all this kind of stuff, are mostly created in the US and not in Europe, and therefore we are lagging behind that kind of field extremely, and that's a strategic disadvantage we have on a like economic large scale. And the second one is also you have to keep in mind that since COVID, we are in an essentially global economic crisis, and every region reacts differently to this. Like Europe does basically self-flagellation, like we suck, everybody sucks, you suck, like everybody pointing finger at each other and all this kind of stuff and getting very negative about everything. And the US is doing the opposite, where they go like as loud as possible, USA, we the best, everybody else suck, you know? And I think this is also like a side product of that additionally, you know? So has it gotten worse? Yeah, definitely, dude. Philip looks like he's exploding right now.
What about Rihanna?
No, it makes me really angry to hear. I mean, I get it. Like, I know that, you know, the US has shifted, and I think, I don't think we should care too much about it, honestly. I think we are confident enough in Europe. We have amazing companies. We have fantastic talent. We have the capital available. Like, I think that's also, you know, go back to, you know, more self-confidence. I think there's some European startups at the moment that are writing global history, and I think we also just need to be aware of our strength and our differences, and aware obviously of the stuff that we need to improve, because there are a few things, but at the same time of also not everything in the US is made out of gold either, right? So I think let's acknowledge we're different, and maybe we do things slightly differently as well, but at the same time I think Rio can be you know, as confident as ever about the potential of our ecosystem, and I think we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing together. And then I think I also hate this like bashing, like US is this and China is that and Europe is this. At the end, the potential in collaborating is compounding, and I think that's where I would like the ecosystems to go. We're seeing this. We're seeing a lot of our European companies, you know, doing super well in the US when they go to market, and you know, US investors coming over here. So I think that's rather than, you know, always doing this like judging who's better or worse. Like let's realize the potential of working together. And I think from the European perspective, and I think that's not only true in startups but in politics in general. If I sometimes see politicians going to the White House, I feel like okay, they already go there with like you know, this small, even smaller. So I think let's gain that line back. That's what I think sometimes.
So John asked me what I thought of all this.
Go for it.
Right. So just for everybody, at ConceptionX, we're a non-profit, and we work with PhD researchers and postdocs across Europe to turn frontier research into deep tech companies that are venture scalable. And we kind of champion this idea of the venture scientist, where we started this around 7 years ago, and we think that the top companies of the future are actually going to be led by the scientists who actually came up with the research. So we work across PhDs, and obviously it's a new type of approach. They need a different sort of accelerator, different kinds of program, if you can call it that. Arguably different ways of funding them, and we're seeing a lot of interest in this space. But like, you know, we have some of the best researchers in the world in Europe, and definitely some of the best institutions. And I definitely, like, from my angle, I see quite a lot of, with the US question, there's quite a lot of interest from the US to come and look, work, attract some of these venture scientists. So there's definitely quite a lot of wealth here from that perspective.
I think there's a lot of academics who'd be very keen to move to Europe at the moment as well from the US.
Yes.
So there is the knowledge transfer that could be our gain as well at the moment. But yeah, let's stay with ConceptionX. I mean, this story just really captured something with a lot of the readers, because, you know, this idea that you can go from this academia as your life's work in, you know, biotech, deep sciences, to rolling out to become an entrepreneur. Maybe tell us a little bit about what's been going on this year for you as a company.
So a lot of things have been going on, but I think the biggest change has been cultural across Europe. Like, we started off in the UK, and now we work across kind of several countries. For the first time, kind of building a company feels like a first-class career path for researchers. It doesn't feel like a deviation anymore. It's starting in hotspots in different areas. And I think what we've doubled down this year on, because I'm an academic by background, so we've kind of been building the methodology kind of closely in the background, making sure that it works, that the results work. We've been forming alliances with different universities, tech transfer offices, investors, industry, all of this, so that the ecosystem actually becomes self-sustaining and works. And I think the last year has been one of a lot of growth for us, because we're starting to, the kind of culture piece is going out. We're kind of starting a conversation about, what does it mean to actually be a founder? You don't need to look, it's not, you don't need to cosplay as some, intensive performative type of, there's not just one way to be a founder. Like, I think, if scientists are going to become founders, they might behave, pitch, etc., in different ways than is necessarily pushed out there. Like, there's only one way you can do things. The second thing that has been really good is that we wanted to deploy smart capital, ignition capital, quickly into some of these companies, coming from people who understand what it means to build an early stage deep tech company that takes a lot of years, etc. So we've brought together, very much in the Conception X spirit, a bunch of exited science founders, entrepreneurs, people who understand deep tech. We kind of brought these as a community, and with the kind of Conception X machinery that chooses the top 100 each year, and all the insights that we have, putting forward some of these top teams and get those science angels to fund them, early stage, very quickly, across Europe. And that's been extremely popular. And I think there's so much interest for next year. So it just makes us really happy to work with them.
Amazing. Were there any sectors or particular areas of science or tech that really were stuck out this year?
Yeah. So just generally, lots of innovations in material science. So, one of our companies called Matter AI, like, we can generate and evaluate 100 new material structures per hour. That's crazy. Detecting disease and foreign DNA within minutes. That's, one of our companies, InveneerX. More recently, predicting weather events beyond 2 weeks with much less compute, quantum-inspired algorithms. That's one of our companies, Chronon. So we're seeing just generally AI entering very much into the kind of scientific discovery aspect of things, reducing that time very quickly, but also finding that in a lot of innovations across hardware, drug discovery. So it's quite wide, and it's like extremely exciting.
Absolutely. And it's funny, we are 30-ish minutes in, something like that. You've been the first mention of AI.
Yeah.
Look how restrained we are. I was kind of impressed with that, actually. Okay, so let's jump to you, Filip and Cherry. I mean, you've had some really big, mighty goals this year, including the goal to build the $500 million fund to build Europe's first $1 trillion company. Where are things at? Maybe walk us through a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. Let's put it that way. So
awesome.
Obviously, I think we started the year with a new fund, raised 500 million total, and started deploying that this year. We've done 16 new investments in 2025, which is a lot for us. We typically more around like 12 to maximum 15, especially beginning of the year was busy. And I think what we love to see this year is that the ambition level in Europe has really changed. So we've been investing in some super exciting projects like Proxima Fusion, Quant, photonic chips, exploration company. That's something we've done. We continue to invest this year, but the initial investment was earlier. So it's amazing to see the momentum in deep tech. There's a ton of momentum, of course, around AI, which is probably like the second area where we've spent most of our time. And yeah, so I think it's been an amazing year. And I like that generally with the momentum that the ecosystem has in Europe is that we're seeing bigger outcomes, we're seeing higher ambition, and we're not there yet, but I think the the first $1 trillion company out of Europe is not an if, it's more a when. It's more a matter of time.
Amazing. And a question for both yourself and Jed and Ram, if you want to jump in on this one as well, is how do you think about companies? Like, how do you measure, distinguish a company that's sort of in a wave of innovation hype versus someone who's got the ability to be one of those, either a category leader or someone that's got, going to make a reasonable impact to a sector?
I mean, I can start, but generally, I think we see more consolidation next year. I think we were coming from a time where everyone was trying all these AI solutions, a lot of experimental budgets, and companies have been just like spending a lot of budget on new tools. And I think next year ROI will matter so much more, and we're going to look at like which tools can actually deliver value. And it becomes more of a, the CEO can say, oh, I'm using AI to, okay, AI is actually delivering value. And I think we're coming from a time with like simpler tasks, maybe first agents or like chat assistants. And I think we're moving to an area where AI will be able to, execute more complex multi-step tasks that will end to, larger enterprise use cases that will, eventually create more value. And so I think that's also the toughest part of our job right now, to understand, okay, which companies, which products actually have defensibility and mold built in with the world that is changing so fast. Next tool comes along, you're switching, and often you see very high growth initially, but then you also see high churn. So I think we're so chapter 2 AI with next year, where substance matters more and hype hopefully matters less. That's my view.
From another perspective, I'd say we have a slightly different view, because we're doing due diligence on teams, literally for up to 6 months before we invest. And so I think to your question on, is it hype or is it real? I think part of it is working with founders, because at the end of the day, for early stage, it's all about the founders and the quality of the team. And so it's kind of classic questions of what are they bringing to the table? What's their unfair advantage? Is it go to market? Is it product? Is it something that they've seen before? And then I think to kind of what Filip said as well, like, what are they validating? What value add are they creating? And is there proof that, can they get others on board the journey? Who are their advisors? What customers have they gotten? What is the early proof of concept show with the product? But I think part of the reality, especially in pre-seed, is most of these teams will pivot after investment. And there's a lot of stuff we're talking about here, like payment agents and agentic AI, where it's early days, and so many things are changing even on a daily or weekly basis. That have huge follow-on effects for all these companies. And so I think part of it is backing great teams. The other part of it is figure it out as you go, and then trying to build conviction, just that there's something different and strong about the team that will help them be probably the best out of 1,000 teams out there.
I think actually, interestingly, the bigger question isn't so much whether AI is hype or not, but whether general or specialized applications of AI will win. Because if all of your startups are going to be eaten up by OpenAI or Google or whoever training a better model, then this is quite tragic. And this is for me, like, the most unclear about this paradigm shift. That usually paradigm shift creates a lot of new business, a lot of niches, a lot of what is called normal science. And here it's unclear that it will be so. Like, it might be, but it's also possible that all the benefits will be eaten up by the big guys with big models and a lot of resources. And if that's the case, that's a very painful transformation for humanity as a whole.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I think that's one of the issues with OpenAI at the moment. I think the startups are concerned about working with OpenAI because they can't get any assurance that they're not going to come and launch a kind of similar product in their field too.
We've seen this before, right? And we've seen this before with Microsoft. We've seen this before with Google. And there's kind of these cycles that happen with these platforms. And I think there's kind of a couple questions, which is, as they get larger in size, I think it's fair to say that they're only going to be going after things that move the needle. And so there's kind of this question as investors and with founders is, are you going after something that's exciting enough, but not too big? Because if it's too big, to your point, it could make sense for them to go after that space. But I think there's kind of this delicate balance of trying to find something that's big enough but not too big, for especially in the early stages.
I mean, maybe just quickly. Oh, sorry, Ram.
No, I was just saying that, with the hype stuff, because like with on our side, a lot of for the founders to make it to Conception X, they have to come from a lab that has done 5 years of research in an area. Like it's a new thing. Sometimes I wish they would follow the hype stuff a little bit more so that they could get a bit more funding faster, but they don't. But like what we see with like the AI companies that come out, like they follow this pattern where it's usually like two very smart people and they publish a lot of papers in a specific type of, or something related to AI. Then like Human Loop were an example of that, and they were acquired by Anthropic recently. And we have two of those now, and what they do is that they publish, and then they build something quickly, and then they attract funding. So we're seeing that trend as well. Whereas others like Matter AI, like they don't use an existing LLM to like build their materials, right? Like these are physics-based models that would have been built with like lots of data from a material science lab, and then they go and build the thing. So it's interesting.
I agree with that. Well, Cate, first of all, I want to say Merry Christmas because I got a jump.
Yeah, totally.
In a second. And thanks for having me over.
Pleasure.
And maybe ending on a slightly more optimistic note. I do think that we'll see a lot more sort of domain-specific models. We see a lot more success through fine-tuning that are industry-specific, whether that's legal and healthcare and other domains. So it's kind of like we always used to this most stupid investor question a founder can get is like, what if Google builds this? And that's always been the case. And I think now the question is like, what if OpenAI builds this or like whatever? And I think there's enough specialization possible just because of the potential impact on certain industries going to be so large. So I'm very optimistic there's going to be some major outcomes within AI that are not the incumbents.
Fantastic. I think it's a good thing to be hopeful for. Absolutely. And happy holidays.
Can I quickly add something to what Filip quickly said?
And
it's a little bit, not sure if it's contradicting. So for quick context, I was first investor in Luma Labs, which is also like an AI frontier. In those kind of companies, the goal isn't to build software. The goal is to build the industry after software. And that's like a fundamental thing. Like this is why they, for example, just raised $1 billion. Like this is why you do that kind of stuff. One thing that Riam mentioned, which I fully agree with, is a discussion that's not happened in this room here is like physical AI. This is the actually interesting thing, especially in Europe. Like we are the second largest manufacturing hub in the world. Like, can we compete with building larger LLMs, which is mainly capital driven? I don't know. Can we build better robots? Very likely. And this for me is the most interesting field right now because we had so many tipping points in the last 2 to 3 years around physical AI. Like for example, just in automation and manufacturing, like in computer vision alone, like the innovations we had in the last few years that are made stuff possible in reasoning and so on, created a whole new kind of robotics generation. We will have special purpose-built hardware for every kind of industry, which will become like essentially equivalent to what we had with SAS in the past, where you had like SAS for every industry. We'll have now special machines for that. And then, as Riam mentioned, is like, for example, material science. Like we have like Dunia in Berlin, for example, which is a company doing research on new materials and then having an automated lab to actually test them. And these kind of things, that's to me right now the most interesting. Not so much if you can use like an LLM to build a wrapper for architecture or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And Giles, you're gonna have to jump in. You've got such an interesting company.
Yeah, this is like the physical.
This is your area.
Yeah, it's like obviously also where our heart is, and I couldn't agree more with Andreas that I do think that's really where Europe will have its edge. And I also think it's interesting from the discussion around like will OpenAI eat everything, etc. That ultimately there's two ways to do a robotics company. You can go horizontal, you can go vertical. And the decision there is really not clear which one will win, right? Or which one is easier. Like in our case, we are a vertical robotics company. We're focused on a super precise vertical. It's sustainable housing. And we build a robotics platform to just be the absolute best in the world to do it. If we manage to do that, we will be close to Cherry Ventures' $1 trillion company, probably.
Amazing.
And it's a viable path, right? There is almost no competition in that area. There's like maybe 5-6 companies working on that vertical. So like there's a viable path, and we built a super strong moat, because our moat, you cannot just come after us because we're going fast. We're building the infrastructure, we're building the machines, so that's real moat, right? So I think that's an interesting one, that the capital spent, the money we get from investors, is not spent on customer acquisition, that it's spent on machines, it's spent on physical infrastructure. We're not fighting kind of, just for market share. We're just patiently building a complete new industry, complete new infrastructure. And then the interesting one is, if you compare it with the horizontal model, is that obviously, if you want to become, the foundational model for robotics, you need much more money than OpenAI, right? It's like you're going in 3D, and like in 4D, you're going over time. So you need to raise trillions to do that model. Whereas actually with the vertical model, you don't need that much capital, and you get your money back relatively quickly, right? And I think that discussion is super interesting for next year. Like what we'll see, how people, start in a precise vertical. If it's going well, maybe add a little slice to it again and again and again, versus the other ones that will try to do the horizontals. And as a kind of last discussion point, which I find amazing in the discussion about Europe, is to like some of Andreas' points, is like, I do hope that there will be someone in Europe who has the courage to want to do that horizontal one, which is very, very difficult to build in Europe. But if we want to maintain our edge, we've just sold ABB robots to Japan, to SoftBank.
I saw that.
So if we want to, they're now on our cap table. So now we have SoftBank.
I was surprised by that, I've got to say. I mean, it's been a year of M&A. I was also surprised by Arduino's sale to, who was it? Sorry, it's on my list. Whoever they sold that to. That really surprised me as well. Arduino sold to...
So like the question maybe forever is like are we capable of building that horizontal robotics model in Europe, or is it just smart to go vertical and capitalize on it?
To add what Cate said, like it's Qualcomm, by the way, we are extremely good in selling our core assets. Like we are the second largest manufacturing hub, and we manage to asset strip pretty much everything that's important for manufacturing to Asia. Like the sale to ABB sell to SoftBank, KUKA to China. Multiple companies that are now defining what EV is in Asia have been acquisitions from German assets and European assets, originally. And we are really, really good in selling out our core competence. Not to be too doomerism, but like a friend of mine works in a Chinese hedge funds, and his job is basically to find good assets to buy in Europe for Chinese manufacturing. And since a year, he struggles to find anything they don't have already. And I don't know which one is worse, like them acquiring everything or them not finding anything worth acquiring anymore. You know what I mean? So we need to be very strategic as a block about this. And the fact that ABB was able to sell to SoftBank is insane to me personally.
I was shocked by that, I got to say. I mean, sorry, the other one I was trying to remember was Arduino sold to Qualcomm. So that was that one, which also surprised me for the hardware space,
I do have a bit of background on that ABB sale. And in the end, it was just purely the robotics division of ABB was the worst performing division. They were keeping the stock price down. And then it's just you have to please the stock price had to go up. So it was struggling, and they're just let's sell it off.
But that's always an argument for, in that case, you should always outsource everything, every cost factor. But the problem is the moment you're outsourcing your cost factors, which in this case is manufacturing, for example, and robotics and Frontier, the moment you do Frontier outsourcing, you lose your R&D. So I think that the real problem here is that the stock markets in Europe aren't dynamic enough. If ABB would in America, they would just anyway list, and just the hype around robotics itself would hype up the stock market price so much that it doesn't matter what the actual numbers underlying are, So I think the core corporate is us not having a large stock market.
Just Andre, let's talk a bit to broaden out about the European or lack of IPO market in Europe. I interviewed the chief exec recently of NAN, and I asked him about a potential listing, and he was very keen to list in Germany, and I also asked him about being incorporated. So NAN is GmbH incorporated, and he didn't want to be Delaware incorporated. And I'm quite new to this sector, so I didn't really get to the bottom of it. But he was suggesting, I guess most of you know more about this than me, that where you're incorporated impacts the perception of your startup in the market, and it also impacts potentially where you will list. Is that? I didn't really get to the bottom of why that is the case. So. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's a legal reality behind what he's saying, but I think the fact is just, you ask any large group of people, some people will just want to do something. And in his case, they just want to be a German company. They just want to list in Germany. I don't think it's economically the best thing for a company to list in a smaller stock market, period. That's the reason why everybody's doing a flip to Delaware Incs. Through Dutch to be able to list in the Nasdaq and so on, because it's a larger market, because there's more liquidity, because there is more than dynamism in that market size. You know what I mean? I am a big fan of NLN, and I appreciate that they intentionally don't want to do that. It's like, I don't think that we can rely on like every company. Like, for example, I can give you a nice example. TransferWise is a UK/Estonian company. Their market cap is bigger than the whole Estonian stock market. And I'm pretty sure nobody in this room knew that. Maybe not everybody. Again, it's a different discussion, but like most people in this room didn't even know that Estonia has a stock market. You know what I mean? So why? Like why artificially have like limitations here?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Absolutely. So Giles, let's jump back in with you, because I think it's interesting what you're doing, but maybe you could just give us your little, I don't know, your elevator pitch for the listeners who might not be familiar with automated architecture.
Yeah, thank you, Cate. And first of all, so great to hear that we were one of the most read articles. Well done. That's great. We didn't
you.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So we're building essentially a robotics platform for housing. So it's both hardware and software together. And as I mentioned before, we're a vertical robotics company with a precise slice that is really focused on housing. We're doing that both in Europe and North America. And we essentially run our robots as a service. So it's a robotics as a service model, where the core bit of technology are kind of pop-up robotic microfactories. And like, that's a lot of words, but like essentially you can picture it as kind of container-sized units that has an ABB robotic arm on it and an assembly table, and that can fully autonomously take any material, like any timber material, can be American or European lumber, spruce or oak, and it will then turn that into parts of buildings. So it makes like walls and floors and roofs. And the kind of crazy thing is that it's all in a closed loop. So it's fully autonomously. We can run these at 95% profit margin. So we don't actually have to be there. We just ship it, can press go, and it starts building.
What kind of response do you get from the industry? I mean, it's often said that these are sectors where you have aging populations, it's difficult to attract new talent, blah, blah, blah. What are you seeing in that as far as that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the construction industry is famously a very, very difficult industry.
It's also very unionized, isn't it?
Yeah, they're unionized. They're famously very low productivity. It's one of the only industries that had a flatline productivity since the 1940s. Super fragmented, really complex. My background is an architect, so before doing I already kind of knew how the industry works. But I would say like part of our ethos is really centered around that idea of like, you cannot do this alone. If this is the ambition to do something so big, it needs to involve the industry. So we were lucky that we just, from the very start, we did 6 iterations of our microfactory, always together with customers, potential customers. So we have a lot of battle scars of trying to do something that really works for the industry. And we've learned a lot that essentially it's not really about the robots that much. It's just really about adoption management. It's really about how do you design something that takes zero effort from the industry to adopt, because they don't have the capabilities, the margins to hire someone new to run that robot.
Mm.
So, or at it, like what we learn is just like you just need to. Everyone wants this, but it needs to be so easy, right? Like no
Yeah.
new hiring, no changes in the software stack. You can just plug it in, and yeah, now there's a lot of momentum, especially I would say North America. So we're London based, but the biggest market is the US and Canada, and there's some, let's say, unfortunate changes in the labor market for construction in the US that are powered by the new administration, where a lot of construction workers are no longer there. And
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
it's essentially in combination with supply chains that are breaking down and a lot of cost pressure is giving us a bit of momentum in North America.
And who's the core user? Is it the property developer? Like who is using the product essentially?
Yeah, it's really the home builder. So there are people that either do the full process of buying land and then subcontracting out work until they can sell the home, or there is companies that offer essentially home building as a service to property developers and real estate market. So it's really builders. It's a super physical customer. It's like 2 feet on the ground, obsessed with nails and screws and plumbing, etc. That's really our world. Yeah.
And why do you think this has gained traction when other attempts to automate in construction haven't? For example, I guess the 3D printing is one that, there's always a video and then the question is always, is it real? Is it fake?
It's like for me, that's really like this is truly my passion. I'm very attracted to very big problems. And first of all, like housing is like a cornerstone, massive societal problem across the developed world, right? So that's the attraction. Then the other attraction is that this problem no one has solved this. We've tried this for 100 years. It's a 100-year-old problem with a very simple question. Can we actually build houses like as if it's nothing, right? Can we do it super cheaply, efficiently, in a predictable way? So 100 years ago, people were already trying this. They were doing factories, all these stories that you read of like modular factories, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
100
I used to
years
write
ago,
so much
people
about
tried.
that.
Yeah, and it always fails, right? And so
I know.
like the brief thing that we just discovered is like, do not build factories. That's the key, because you're not selling a predictable product. You cannot build a factory. So anyone who's building factories have profoundly misunderstood the problem and the industry. So our whole thing is like our factories move to where the work is. So you break that kind of fundamental problem. And then the second thing is you have to be extremely cost obsessed. And like if you just do a basic napkin math, you know that essentially like 3D printing buildings, for example, does not make sense from a cost perspective. It's too slow, it's too expensive, you cannot compete. So you have to be super, super, super cost obsessed. And like that's the only way you sell this in the industry as well. Like the only pitch you need to do to a builder is just say that it's X amount cheaper. Speed is not actually super important in this conversation. And you need to be able to back it up with actual numbers, like down to the nails. And then they believe you that yes, it's real. It's not one of those other attempts. Yeah.
Amazing. And so what are your goals for the incoming year?
So we are essentially we're kind of halfway through our journey from 0 to 10, like 10 microfactories in operation with customers. So we're looking at deploying the next iteration of our product, which is also, I mean, for us was kind of the highlight this year. Like we've managed to really prove that story that you can develop hardware at software speed. So we went through a cycle of 3 months from nothing to a new product that is now physically up in our space in London. Yeah, which is crazy. Like our hardware team just completely outcompeted our software team on delivery.
I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And so we're launching that new product into the market in September. So you'll see a lot of demos coming out and videos where we're presenting the product and going to be showing how we built in public. And then it's about shipping those 5. And the main thing for us, the main metric is usage, and that's the key thing with robots. It's just they need to be used non-stop. So it's all about proving that we have a little hockey stick curve going up for each robot in isolation, and then those start compounding into a bigger thing.
Yeah, amazing. And Simon, I know you have an interest in housing with some of the other work you're doing with co-working and co-housing spaces, co-living. Do you want to maybe chime in a little bit about some of your thoughts in this space?
Well, I mean, this is clearly one of the largest asset classes in the world that's still very undisrupted. And I would argue that, I think World Health Organization published this. As humans, we spend 90% of our time indoors. Be that good or bad, it's ultimately a box in which we spend our time. And so we dedicated a lot of our time on how to make this better for the innovation economy with factory.com, where we actually built an innovation cluster in Berlin, and it's the second one now in Lisbon, where we always try to get a good mix of the local but also international innovation scene into one place. So be that big tech, be that local startups from very early stage until Series A, Series B. And what we realized with one of our first clients, SoundCloud, is that the growing pain translated into real estate of a startup is really a tough challenge. So if you have 100 people and you try to get to your Series B with 300 people, let's say, there's no corresponding offer in the real estate segment. So we kind of created one where we say we dedicate a stage of a company to a size and duration of a space, the duration of the contract. So it's a modular system, very similar to co-working, but for a bit later stages. So our stuff really starts at Series C with around 200 square meters or 2,000 square feet. What we also realized is that it has significant impact on neighborhood, but also specifically on policy. So creating tangibility around startups and startup founders, a place where people can go to an experience. I think the big examples are Station F, Factory Berlin, and some others, really makes a difference in this understanding of what's going on in the innovation economy, because it becomes tangible. You can talk to people. It's a go-to destination. And that's a big job. So building these things is very slow. We tend to build buildings that are in the 10,000 square meter, 100,000 square feet size range. Construction, like Jill said, is insanely difficult and insanely understandardized. So it's really, really hard when you go from Germany and you build something, you go to Portugal and you build something, and now we want to go to Greece and to other places to build stuff. That's a very, very difficult challenge. It takes much longer than you think. In Lisbon, we were swung hard by the pandemic as well. So the shortages of supplies, the increased cost of any material was a really tough one to work around. But yeah, ultimately build more of these. And I truly believe that if we have a network of places across Europe that we somehow connect, where the best of in-class innovators, founders, VCs, everyone get to meet and exchange, we would be improving the infrastructure for Europe to succeed. So that's our mission ultimately, to build more of these places and connect them.
Absolutely. I was actually a member of Factory for 3 years here in Berlin. So yeah, it's a great space.
Very cool.
Very useful. Yeah. And Jed, maybe we can, please go for it. Sorry.
I was just going to add, so maybe from kind of the software side, so I think a couple of things in housing and construction that we're seeing. We have one company called Planning Hub. And so they're working on dealing with government regulations and permits. So we talk about building things, but then there's also kind of getting permission and understanding what you can and can't build. And that process takes a long time. It's constantly changing. And it's quite expensive as well. So it's kind of onerous on many levels. By the way, both for the constructors and the government regulators, on both sides. So we have teams that are applying AI to that problem. And one of the co-founders has a PhD, in AI. The other one has like over 10 years of experience of, building real estate. And so I think a good example of government, private sector overlaps and kind of navigating that. Another kind of interesting area is productivity of workers. And so when you look at kind of, orchestration for building, we estimate that probably 1 out of every 5 days is just lost. And that's like navigating version control of documents and making sure you're propagating updates across multiple areas so that everyone's on the same page. I mean, buildings are classically, they take too long and they cost too much. And they always, it's just, you have constant kind of inefficiencies where you have costs and delays. And so I think there's a big opportunity for tech and startups to, really add a lot of value with that. So we have another team that we recently backed that's looking at building design and kind of building an orchestration layer that basically integrates into these platforms such that, you're able to not just deal with these things faster, but you could probably deal with multiple projects at once. Like you're currently limited in your capacity because of all these inefficiencies. So I think overall, we see a lot of upside in this space. And I think part is just you have legacy systems and tech is kind of slowly getting its way in there.
Very cool. Exciting. So, I'm sorry, that was me typing. I was just checking if our Jevgeni is coming back from Bolt, because I know we had a bunch of questions for him around vehicle automation, but fingers crossed there. But Jed, maybe we can talk a little bit about 2025 for Antler. How's it been? What's been the kind of the standouts for you?
I mean, so we're industry agnostic, which I think is kind of unique as an investor. We've invested over 35 different sectors. And I think, we've already kind of, the word AI has come up already on this discussion. And I think that's, seeing AI applied to very specific problems has just been quite exciting. And, when you get someone who has domain expertise and you have the right, tech skills on the team. I know we talked earlier about, with what Riam's doing with, getting academic researchers and PhDs. Part of it is they need commercial co-founders and CTOs to kind of realize their vision, and someone who can go out there and get market traction. And so I think for me, in the next year, it's a continuation of a lot of what we've seen this past year. Just very optimistic in terms of progression, in particular with AI. You see models keep getting better, cost keeps dropping. There's some estimates that, if you look at over a 2-year period, we're talking about like 100x improvement versus where you were 2 years ago, between kind of models getting better and being able to use the latest tech to apply things to this. So I think we'll see more of that. Kind of just, there's different segments that become suddenly very attractive because AI unlocks it. Kind of like you couldn't create the upside needed to get backing and investment. But now you're seeing these whole new problem areas, like a couple that I just mentioned, where for the first time, you actually have VC fit. And so I'm quite excited to see more of this as we work with our teams.
Fantastic. Very cool. And I think one thing that people really liked about Antler is this day zero approach that you have in terms of working with founders from, even almost pre-idea. Can you tell me a little bit about how you sort of validate that?
Yeah, so maybe just for context, we get about 5,000 applications for about 100 spots. And as you said, most of the people come in, they all have ideas, it should be clear, but we estimate that 80+% of them drop their idea within 2 weeks. And part of it is because, this is realistic, the markets change. Are we building something that's big enough, exciting enough? And the other part of it is a lot of our founders don't know who their co-founder is yet. And so how do you actually build like a super strong team unless you know what your superpowers are? But I think part of it is, you can have a great idea and a great market and a great opportunity, but if the team is not uniquely suited to solve the problem, then you probably need to move on and find something that kind of aligns to your strengths. So I think there's kind of this alignment of having the right team in the right problem area that a lot of teams go through. I've worked with many teams where it's like, this is an interesting area, I agree with you, but what is your right to win in this space? Now, on the positive side, what happens is if you have bright founders who do have, spikes or domain expertise, there's tons of things to do. There's a bunch of exciting opportunities to go after. And so what we do is we work with them for 2 to 3 months on site at our office here in London in order to kind of help find that direction. And so that's kind of the model and how it works. But I think the short answer to your question is it takes about 2 to 3 months to properly work with the team and build conviction on a problem area that's a good fit for them.
How, just on the AI tools, are you using AI tools to help with investment decisions at all or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we probably have hundreds of data points per team over the 3-month period. So I think the answer to your question is we're capturing a lot of data as we're building conviction on teams and finding out where we need to support, what key questions are still outstanding. As a team, we all have different strengths and kind of backgrounds that we can apply to certain teams. And so if we need someone who has, let's say, a background in real estate or a background in fintech, we can pop them in there and kind of really quickly help them figure out key questions. So I think the answer to your question is, we're kind of capturing all these feedback. We're then escalating it where appropriate to bring in teams as quickly as possible to help out, and then building conviction. And, for some teams, I've seen this, I've done over 100 investments in my 5+ years at Antler. And so I've seen examples where teams, they break up. We describe it as like Love Island meets Dragon's Den. And, co-founders have to find the right chemistry, but they also have to find a good business. And there's countless examples of teams where they gave up after 2 weeks. And they landed on a different problem area. And then to your point, John, we find out they're in a different area. So we get the right expert to come in and help them. So maybe they're focused in prop tech. We get a prop tech expert in our network who goes in and kind of battle test what they're going after. And then you build conviction. So yeah, we do use AI to kind of more rapidly build confidence in the direction of a team and to kind of highlight where we can support and also where we're losing conviction, because there's a lot of examples of teams that do find their way after deciding this is a dead end.
That's one way to deal with it. I mean, it's funny when I think about 2025, probably one of the most pervasive trends I've seen is pivots. Pivots that I would expect in maybe earlier founders, I've seen in, really, really established teams. So I think it's interesting that a lot of people are really thinking about that defensibility side of it, because it just, it's been tough the last couple of years for startups. So, super important. And so with that in mind, I mean, you've backed, you've backed some heavy hitters. Lovable, PKI, who is definitely on my radar at the moment. Carbon, of course. Are there patterns that you're noticing amongst those stronger performers that are sort of learnables or teachables for other startups in your portfolio or people sort of entering the program?
I mean, when you've seen, I think probably all the investors in this call probably agree is, as your sample size grows and you see what great looks like, you kind of recalibrate. And the thing that the great teams have in common is they're amazing founders that move amazingly quickly, and they're very magnetic, and they're able to get people on board with the crazy thing that they want to build. And they're able to, get proof really, really fast. And yeah, I think speed is everything, particularly in this market. And we've talked about kind of the leveling of AI and how people have access to tools, which is great. It lowers costs, allows you to more quickly, but also others have access to the same tools. And so there's this kind of constant balance of, are you moving fast enough? And then are you building something special enough such that either it's your brand or some sort of, data angle that you have or some sort of moat where, you'll have a leg up over others as you build out further. But I think the common thing with the ones that you mentioned were great founding team, incredible fast speed, and then being able to build just a strong team around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you look at it? Do you look at it as searching for those front runners or those category leaders from the get-go, or are you looking at people where there's a crowded market, but ultimately there'll be one company who can either outpace them, acquire them, have an edge of some sort?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple ways of looking at that. I think as you have these constant opportunity windows of time that kind of constantly, they're moving by, and there are certain areas where that was the time to build a company, and like there's just a real advantage and edge with having a year head start or 2 year head start. So I think it's a combination of building confidence that yes, they're one of the early players in the space, but also there's kind of the crystal ball part, which is, will this space win? And is this an approach that works? And constantly we do investment committees where we have a team and they're doing amazing work. And it's like, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, they're great. Yeah, they're moving fast. But there's also 10 other ways of solving this problem. And because the world is changing so quickly and this is so early, we don't know for sure if this is the winning path. But it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which is most teams pivot after investment anyways. And so I think there's a bigger bet on the team and the problem area, and understanding that it is likely that they might change direction after this investment. And in some cases, you pick the right path, as the ones you mentioned. And by the way, even then it's an asterisk, right? Because we're a long-term investor for 10 years. Right now it looks great. But there's also a bunch of example stories of companies that got to unicorn valuation and, it didn't turn out great for them, at the end.
Yeah, that's it.
So, it's kind of a adage in early stage in inception investing, which is it takes like 5+ years normally to really know what you got. And even then you're not there yet, but at least you have more confidence on, is this a team in a business that can really, scale longer term.
And how do you think of it, Riam? I mean, I know you have an investment arm as well. And obviously when you're talking biotech, deep tech, you talk about some of those longer investments.
Yeah. So like I was listening to Jed and like the Antler day zero approach. Ours is slightly different. Like we don't have this thing where we have a science founder or a technical founder and then we kind of match them with a business founder. We do the opposite. We look for those scientists who should lead on their company, because you can actually learn things like selling and whatever. It's much harder to learn quantum physics if you haven't studied that for a while. So we're looking for a particular type of founder. And on the pivot side, we have much less of this pivoting. Like, sure, they pivot in some ways, but if you've come in to build a new type of chip or a cancer vaccine and you're kind of designed for that, there's only so much you can pivot within that. Like, sure, you find better ways to build it, but you're not suddenly flipping to do like another idea. So like we've seen people sometimes, like we've seen pivots where, for example, we've had a company that exited quite early called Raco, and they were doing like quantum inspired machine learning algorithms, and they wanted to build batteries, but then they decided they were going to do it in the drug discovery space and then immediately got acquired. So there's that kind of pivot, but the core technology and algorithm is still, there. So they're not, it's still about the tech. So yeah, I mean, I think it needs a specific type of investor in many cases, because like our companies receive investment before they necessarily look shiny or ready enough to kind of pitch externally. So we're looking for investors who can understand the tech and the potential of the companies. And we've made 14 investments this year as part of the Angel Syndicate. They're across so many areas, like cancer vaccines, neuromorphic computing, materials discovery, everything. And, it's good to see how these will evolve.
Amazing. Great. Okay, we're kind of getting near the sort of end of the podcast. So, I guess there's a time where we do a few rounds, a few sort of general questions where people can say what they would like. I guess one thing I was thinking to ask people was, is there any particular countries or regions or or cities that you're thinking will be a kind of a breakout in 2026?
In Europe or globally?
Oh, it could be either. Yeah.
I think next year, pretty much every VC will fly to Shenzhen. And at the end of the year, everybody will have a thesis on India.
India is mine too. I feel very bullish on India. I think it's an area where I'm also seeing a lot of startups in Europe now scaling that way. So, which I think is super interesting.
I
It's such a
used to
big
invest a
market.
lot in Indian deep tech, especially space tech. It's
Right.
more interesting to invest in space tech there. Like now, it's getting better, but until recently in Europe, because how ESA funding works and everything like that, not having launchers and all this kind of stuff. And in general, also manufacturing, they're scaling up now. There is a lot of stuff. For example, Nothing, which is a European phone brand, are using now in India as well. So India is super interesting, and I'm 100% convinced that literally every VC in Europe will fly to Shenzhen next year to just get a better understanding of that market. 100%.
John, you interviewed Nothing, didn't you?
I didn't interview him. They did a crowdfunding round recently, didn't they? I think we covered that. I didn't interview him there, but I mean, they're really interesting.
Carl is amazing. He's the mixture of a very pragmatic, dry Chinese person with the dry person of a Swedish upbringing. It's an amazing character. I love
unusual combination of traits.
Yeah, I love this character.
I love that. Yeah, I think China's a good one. India, I agree with as well. I went to China earlier this year for a press trip with Renault, the car company, and really learning about how they were approaching European competitiveness in the automotive space, which is, a really hard one at the moment, was to basically get the R&D from China and bring it back to their factory in Romania. Sorry. So it was a super interesting approach. So it shows you there's a lot of capacity there, but also staff as well, bringing staff over, things like that as well. I think for me, in terms of other places, I'm actually going to say Poland. I'm seeing a lot of movement in Poland at the moment. I've got an article coming out first week of January, which is about Belarusians who have moved to Poland after being exiled for obvious political reasons, and have been quite successful with their companies, really bringing a lot of money into the economy, basically R&D, talent, so forth. So I think Poland's going to be a really interesting place to watch over the next year.
What about the other guests? What about the other guests? What did they think? Girls, I'm sorry.
So in the kind of academic deep tech space, because we work with a lot of European universities, the UK, especially London and the surrounding areas, are still very much a hotspot. And I think from our discussions with a lot of Nordics and of these people who want their teams to build, for those who do not necessarily want everybody to move directly to the US, the UK seems to be the next best thing, that also closer to home with regards to having access to a larger market and capital as well. So definitely we're seeing that perception. So it's good to be in the UK, to be doing academic deep tech spin-offs.
Interesting. John?
Yeah, I would agree with the UK. I mean, China is it's going to keep being in the news, and just like small anecdotes that how we're experiencing that. So we're commissioning parts for robots. You go to a lot of UK suppliers; they're all late. It's all wrong.
Really? Oh no!
And then it's really unfortunate, but then ultimately now we're having them made in China, and really enough, they're faster to ship from China to Europe. And it still shows like we're definitely, yes, we're like the world's second manufacturing hub, but we're not out of the woods with kind of, if a small company like us has to go to China and it's better quality, it's faster, then we're going to keep hearing a lot about that discussion.
It's such a shame, because there was such a push after the woes of COVID supply chain that really brought it to the public's attention that we were going to, mass produce in Europe, and we were going to have, reducing some of those complexities and bottlenecks. And then I hear this, which I've heard from other people as well.
And it's incredible because like everyone at the company does not want this to happen, right? It's the last resort. We're so, supportive of the UK manufacturing ecosystem. We're trying everyone, and we're trying to work with other startups who are, doing great things in manufacturing space. But in the end, you have to be, if it comes down to timelines and costs, it's still somehow then in the end China that does it better and faster. So.
Yeah, it's funny though, because the UK I'm always getting press releases, and I think John probably more than me because you live there, about the government investing in quantum and AI and sort of these big big investments that boil down to 20 different things across different areas, and a lot of regional investment, which I kind of like. I think that's a trend I'm hoping to see more of in 2026, the regional focus. So startups that are building in smaller towns or cities, rather than just like, for example, in Portugal, going past Lisbon to Porto or other places. I think that's super cool too. Yeah.
What about you, Simon?
I've been, from Berlin to Lisbon. I've been sort of, I would argue, fleeing from the cold and looking to the south more, and I think more regional as we're building real estate. So for me, Athens is at the very top of my list, has been for years now. Greece, very similar economy to Portuguese, but with the Cyrillic alphabet, they have a couple of hurdles that are difficult to overcome when it comes to startups and promotion. Those are really easy, low-hanging sort of fruits to fix, looking at it from the outside. And it's a beautiful and very large city. It's the second largest on the Mediterranean. So I think there's a lot coming. And next year, there's the Panathenia conference, which is run by Lars Rasmussen and a very young team of students, similar to the Slush model. I was there last year at the first one. It was really cool. And I think next year is just going to be a lot bigger and better.
Yeah, I went to Athens earlier this year for an AI conference for startups and so forth, and yeah, it's really switched on. It sounds like they're really they've got a sense of cohesion, and as you mentioned, I think the student spin-outs are also going to be a trend. Maybe we'll see next year. I think the last 6 months, I've interviewed more startups where the founders are aged under 18 than any other year, which is kind of great. Makes me feel old, but it's great.
I was going to say, it's great, but it makes me feel old.
But it's hopeful. And actually, one of our top stories was one of those founders who actually founded a company while he was in high school, and he actually got detention for talking to a VC and doing a meeting in the toilets when he was meant to be in a class. So that's a kind of push you like to see. Any final thoughts for 2026? Anyone got a burning comment they'd like to make, or prediction? Anything that you would like to say to our listeners at Tech.eu? What about you, John? You got one?
Silence.
Kick us off.
What
about you, John? Any thoughts?
I'm hoping not to write about. I've written an awful lot of. The one company I've written more about than any company this year is Bending Spoons.
Really?
So has everyone got anyone got an opinion on that? That's a really interesting model, isn't it? Because they've been so acquisitive that I think they're kind of acquiring companies every month.
Right.
They're not even. The process now is they acquire companies, and some of the companies they're acquiring are listed companies, but they're not even these companies are not even bedding in before they're acquiring more and more companies. But the model seems to be quite successful for them, so we'll have to see.
It's an interesting model. I interviewed Shop Circle recently. I've interviewed them a few times. The CEO there, Luca, I think his name is, might be wrong. Which, and firstly, it's great having, the Italian ecosystem doing cool stuff. But secondly, I think, it's sort of this divestment of people saying we don't have to just rely on VC money. We can do other ways of making companies work, particularly if they're going into sectors or industries where they can access that whole, a company's R&D, a company's software, their client books, all that kind of stuff can be pretty appealing, I'd imagine.
I think in general, roll-ups will be like, I think that this year have been already like a big topic. I think next year will be like getting to absurdity, because in VC, the outcome expectation moved like one magnitude higher now. So we're like, you mean, look at AI frontier models, like if a company raises $1 billion, what kind of outcome do you need to have? And $1 billion isn't even a lot in that field, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you have this in general in VC now. And Spending Spoon especially is very interesting because they primarily acquire for brand value. So they acquire companies that people know as brands, even if you don't use them anymore, you know the company, which is very, very interesting. There's multiple others. There's like a lot of industry, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of roll-ups are happening. In almost every industry, you currently see a lot of roll-ups. I think this will be like one of the biggest topics in next year.
I was speaking to someone from a company who Bending Spoons recently acquired. It was a small US company, and they had about 90 staff. And so the company that was acquired, they knew the Business Spoons business model, so they knew there were going to be large layoffs. So they anticipated that, but they didn't anticipate the extent. I think they laid off if there was 90 staff, I think they laid off all but 2 or 3 people. But they said it was really, Bending Spoons handled it really well. They said the severance pay was really good. This person I spoke to, their only gripe was because they were a technologist and they invested a lot in the tech in the business, was how Bending Spoons was subsequently going to run the business. So they were kind of running it with just 1 or 2 people, just putting fires out. So they weren't going to invest in the tech or anything like that going forward. But generally speaking, they were kind of happy with the whole process about how Bending Spoons handled it, but they were surprised by the kind of the severity. Because I think everyone knows that they're going to make, when they acquire companies, they're going to make major layoffs, but they were kind of surprised about the extent of it. But
I think the next big one will be with very aggressive remote staffing. So you acquire a company and then you concentrate certain parts of the business that you don't need in every company, and then for the rest you hire a lot of people remotely for like a fraction of the cost. This will be like also like this will be like the playbook, I think, in this field, like in the whole micro PE roller PE universe.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think there will be at least one very consequential European deep tech company that's built by an early career researcher, like a PhD in a university, where that becomes a core research output, right? Like building ventures. And I also think that we're going to be having a deeper discussion, because obviously from the academic deep tech space, like what does it actually mean to do a PhD? Like this thesis that people write and then it sits on a shelf. Is that even relevant? Is this what governments are going to be funding over 5 years, especially with AI now? Like it's all, data that's like 3, 4, 5 years old, like wrapped into, a book. That's not relevant. And I think we're going to be looking at that. And until then, there's a huge opportunity, because there's 1 to 2 million researchers and early career researchers across Europe. Like, what are these people doing and how they can be mobilized to actually, build things that have real world impact and consequential, and do not actually like deviate from why they started off to be scientists. So I think that's going to actually become under scrutiny, right? Like, what is a PhD?
That could be very interesting, though. Yeah, that could be an opportunity, right? Because I remember interviewing a company, and their shtick was basically to get those documents, those PhDs people are writing, that sometimes less than 5 people are actually reading, and getting them into popular language through an app where people could, get knowledge from it. They could talk to the researchers directly with the Q&A, stuff like that.
Yeah, but like they have 5 years where they're funded and they have access to gene sequencing machines and spectrometers and like material science lab. What are they doing with this? Because many of them write a thesis and then they go work for Goldman Sachs or whatever. Yeah, no, like, why
what does that mean?
Use that time to build something.
All right, Simon, any last words?
I just hope that the European Union gets their shit together on the policy side for this year. Sorry to be so frank, but
no, not at all.
This is like I think this is the last chance to actually buy in the confidence of the startup and innovation community to whatever the politicians are doing, because it's so obvious, it's been so clear, it's been said for so many years what needs to change. I've been lobbying for 10 years and I've been saying the same things like everyone else for such a long time. It's finally time for a step change.
Yeah,
and this
absolutely.
needs to get the prime ministers on board. This needs to be von der Leyen and decommissioners getting everyone behind the same thing and actually act in unison for once. And I don't think the urgency is clear. I don't think it's fully understood how technology will actually drive anything in the future, wealth, security, everything that we're doing. So if that isn't happening, and if it isn't happening this year, I'm for the first time pessimistic on EU land, but there's still hope. So this time it has to happen.
Absolutely. And I think you've got the support of everyone on the call, and our listeners and our readers as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on our end of year podcast. Absolute pleasure. John, Andreas, Riam, Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to have you here. Wish everyone a very happy festive season. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Alrighty.